Whiskey Wins Everybody. This is the Whiskey Lifestyles Women in Whiskey Series, Season 2. We are back this week with another great guest. She is the U.S. Brand Ambassador for the Balvenie. Welcome, Naomi Leslie, to the show and for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So as I just mentioned, you are the U.S. Brand Ambassador for the Balvenie. But why don't you tell us in your own words what that means and what the day in life of Brand Ambassador is like?
Absolutely. At William Grant & Sons, which is the parent company to the Balvenie, the Brand Ambassador program is super focused on long-term love for the brand, advocacy, storytelling, education, things like that. So as a brand ambassador, that means anything from staff trainings at bars to hosting, larger events and tastings, any type of educational, lovely whiskey moment is on the brand ambassadors.
Okay. And your background was in hospitality. You were a bartender prior to that at some really amazing bars in New York City. Tell us about making that transition and what led you to this position.
Yeah, essentially, I was very happy bartending. I loved bartending and still love any chance I get to do it now, which is great. I was at an awesome bar called Blacktail before this. And my love for the Balvenie specifically started to become very well known within the industry. I think people actually teased me that I must be getting paid by them when I was a bartender because I loved to get everyone to try the Balvenie. I really was just a genuine favorite of mine for kind of the handcrafted story behind it. And then, of course, how just delicious it is. And so I was bartending then, and the woman who had my role got promoted. She was then our national ambassador, and the role opened up. And within a couple days, I think 15 or so different people in the industry texted me and said, "Did you know you have a chance to work for Balvenie? You have to pursue this." And so it was very hard to leave bartending. It was almost like a breakup. It was so hard to give my notice and move on from that because it was such a special time in my life. But it was a genuinely brand-driven decision. I just knew I couldn't pass up a chance to work for specifically the Balvenie.
Okay. And tell us a little bit more about that handcrafted story. I have had the pleasure of having a few drives with you and speaking with you at events and being hosted by your events. And it is a really beautiful story. So if you could just kind of share that with our audience.
Absolutely. So when I started to dive more kind of deeply into the world of spirits and whiskey especially, the more I started to hear a lot of people use the phrase handmade, small batch, handcrafted, all that. And more often, I found that it tended to not actually be true all of the time. It was usually a marketing ploy or something like that. And the more I dug into the Balvenie story and the history behind it and the actual today way that it's still made, not just in 1892 when it was started, the more I just was pleasantly, consistently surprised with how much that handcrafted side of things really holds up. It's still, barley's still grown on site. It's still malted on site. We have our own cooperage, which is extremely, extremely rare in Scotland. We make our copper pot stills by hand still, hand hammered. We have the longest running malt master in Scottish history. I mean, just so much that goes into it is extremely, extremely historical and still treasured to this day. And the cool thing actually, though, that I love as well is while we always make sure we're, treasuring and valuing those handcrafted traditions and sticking to those, the company also still gives a lot of freedom to look into the future and experiment. So it's kind of this perfect balance of keeping a foot in the past while also looking towards the future.
Okay. And in year 5, you've been here 5 years, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So during this 5-year run, what has it been like to represent the brand? I know first is East Coast Brand Ambassador. Now you're the national brand ambassador. What has that meant to you?
It's been it's been lovely, first of all. It's really quite an amazing job. But I think it's been so wonderful to represent a brand that's so beloved to so many folks. So my job day to day is kind of a cool combination of introducing new people to the Balvenie, which is always a treat because, as you know, it's delicious. It usually goes over very well. People love to try it. And it's so fun to bring people on board and show them that, a Scotch whiskey, which people don't always realize, can be smooth and sweet and inviting and warm and comforting. But at the same time, I also meet so many folks that I hear stories of, I drank whiskey with my father and the Balvenie was his favorite and then it became my favorite. And it's just a very storied, beloved brand. And so many people are thrilled when they find out the Balvenie is going to be present somewhere or part of something. It's just a really, really special brand to so many people more than me. And that makes it a very delightful and easy type of job.
Okay. And you mentioned that having one foot in the past and one foot in the future. And one of the things that I think are particularly interesting is the Quest for Craft series that you all have done 2 seasons of with Questlove. Tell us a little bit about your involvement in that and how that came to be. Because again, having as well known as Questlove is as a producer, DJ, filmmaker, yada yada, all the things that he is.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
It seems very different from what people might typically think of a Scotch whiskey or about any in particular.
Yeah, it's been such a nice way to reach, a larger audience because his fans are so devoted. So to be able to produce something with him is the dream. I mean, it's just a whole kind of untapped audience of Questlove, admirers, which there are millions and millions, myself being one of them. And to be able to reach them with this scotch has been so cool. But to be able to do it through this series where it's actually this creative process where he gets to interview other creatives and really dive into what craft means, and that's, search for excellence. It allows a more inviting and all-encompassing way of getting our whiskey out to folks that's not just a paid ad. It's more to it. And then the cool thing about doing the Quest for Craft as an interview series is we then get to have another guest star in every single episode. So that's their audience as well that now the Balvenie is reaching. So it's a really lovely idea. And for involvement on my end, essentially I worked big on the cocktail program. So when guests come into the studio, I greet them and make cocktails for them in Questlove and the guests as well. For all of the Quest for Craft screening parties and things like that. Cocktail development's big on my end. And then most recently, we did a big season 2 premiere, which is extremely fun because we got a bit limited the year before on that with COVID. So it was so fun to finally do a big, kind of press screening moment. And I did a Q&A with him at the start, which was really interesting, and to hear his kind of perspectives on the interviews themselves. So
Yeah, and the amazing thing for those of you who have not seen it, I highly recommend you go onto YouTube, the Balvenie page, and check it out. The series is shot in Electric Lady Studios, which is Jimi Hendrix iconic. I mean, you can tell me about it. You have to spend some time there. I've had the pleasure of spending time there. It's an amazing space. What was that like being in that space with those? I mean, you want to share some of the folks, some of the amazing people that you guys have had Balvenies with.
yeah, I mean, yeah, first of all, Electric Lady is just, I think in 5 years, I can say by far the coolest venue I've ever poured Balvenie in. It's just incredible. Every single room, from the walls to the carpets to everything. There's so much history in there and so much art. I think the very first thing I called for when we were setting up bar prep was to make sure there was a very large bar mat. So like nothing harmed by this bar in this amazing place. But yeah, I think we had so many incredible guests from, Kenan Thompson, Michael Che, which both as a big SNL fan, that was really fun for me. We've had, ballerinas, artists, musicians. Patti Smith was probably the hugest for me. That was an amazing day. And it was very fun. I don't think Questlove will see this, so I can say it was extremely fun to see him a little starstruck, just with Patti Smith in the room. All of a sudden, it was just this energy you could feel of so many people in awe of her and her legacy. And the way she answered questions, I get to watch from the recording studio, which is so cool. I got choked up a couple of times just hearing her answers to certain things. So that was probably the most memorable day on set for Quest for Craft.
So, and how did you decide what cocktails? Did just kind of whatever they wanted, or did you create in terms of creating that program? How did you? I mean, that's just to make a cocktail program in general, I'm sure it can be a bit stressful, but making cocktails for these great creatives, how did you go about doing that?
Yeah, I would usually try to, especially for events where I could do, kind of have more than one recipe on hand, I would try to have something a little bit more stirred and spirit forward, more old fashioned or Manhattan riff. And I'd try to have something that was a bit more sweet, smooth, bright, more citrus forward for folks who maybe don't want something as strong as like a Manhattan or old fashioned. For the actual shootings, I would often do riffs on the penicillin cocktail, which for anyone watching is lemon, ginger, honey, and scotch. And the reason for that is actually simply that the first cocktail I made for Amir that he really loved was a riff on a penicillin. And so I try to kind of go off of that so that he would like the drinks as well.
So, what else? What are some of the other amazing moments? Obviously, we talked a little bit about that, but I know you've been to the distillery several times. Just tell us, a little bit about what is a moment that you've cherished in this, in your role here that you think fondly of.
Yeah, I mean, just anytime I get to go to the distillery, it's just the most magical place. I remember the first time I ever went with Gemma, who you know well,
Mm.
um, back in 2018. I was almost nervous to see it because I had this beautiful image in my mind of this again, like handcrafted whiskey, and I was kind of nervous I'd get there and be like, oh, it's a factory, and they just got a really, you know, which is the case a lot of times at distillery visits. I mean, I know as a bartender, sometimes that beautiful picture you have in your head can be a bit shattered when you get there. And it was the complete opposite. Like it was absolutely even more magical than I could have imagined. Of course, that was about 48 hours of no sleep with jet lag, but I think, but no, I've been back many times since, and there turned out to be a big lapse in time where I couldn't make it during the COVID pandemic, and I missed it so much it became almost painful. And I finally this last fall got to go back a couple of times. And my very first trip, I was hosting some bartenders, some top bartenders from the US, incredible, impressive hospitality folks. And we arrived on site from our lodging, and I had to pretend I forgot something in the van because I could feel myself getting kind of emotional. I was like, you go ahead. I'll run back real quick. And I just kind of stood there for a second and took it all in and that view. Yeah, to say the least, it's a very magical and special place to me.
That leads me actually to another question. We in this series, first season of the series, we're asking people what it means to be a woman in whiskey, and and there was some great answers. There was a little bit of controversy. There was a little bit of controversy with the term, which is kind of why we named the series that, because we wanted to address it head on. But this season, we've been asking people, what is it that you would tell your younger self about being in this industry or being in this job? What is the piece of advice that you would give yourself 5 years ago before you took on this role?
Ironically, my path to this role in the beverage industry and bars and such as that were strongly led by women. The bars I worked at, owned by, managed by. I mean, most managers I had, bartenders that taught me all those things were really strongly female forward. I mean, at Dear Irving, Sarah Morrissey and Ranjini Bose were my two mentors by far as bartenders, and they were incredible. So to me, it actually became funny when I got this job that people would ask sometimes, because for me, it was like, it's just always been that way. I've always been surrounded by women in these bars, and the teams were incredible. And I was very lucky and used to that. Once I got this job, same thing. I mean, most people in the Balvenie, our national ambassador was, now Gemma's becoming our global brand manager. She's very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Our, now master distiller, Kelsey McKechnie, coming on board as a woman. And she's been our apprentice since I started. So I've known her as a leading role. Our, global director is a woman. It's just a really female-led world out there. And over in Scotland, too, there are way more women that work in distilleries than folks sometimes realize. And I've had some women friends of mine who go to Scotland and go on tours and things at different distilleries come back and actually tell me that it was delightfully surprising how many women work in the whiskey industry over there. I would actually say in the US, I think that stereotype prevails more than when you actually go to Scotland. So in the US, sometimes I get asked more about, or people will be surprised more that I'm a young woman working in this industry. And I would say 90% of the time, 99% of the time, it is never an issue. Are there sometimes rooms I walk into where they may not expect a female to be presenting? Absolutely. But I always try to see those moments when the audience might be a bit hesitant as an opportunity. And of course, that's easier said than done sometimes when you get frustrated with certain things. But I really, truly see it as an opportunity to get people to be surprised and end up on your side and end up really understanding how much knowledge a woman can have in this industry. So usually I would say almost every single time it works out for the best, and I end up making new friends, and then their horizons are kind of broadened. So, yeah, as long as you try to look at it as an opportunity, not as a frustrating, barrier, it really can usually work out very well.
Yeah, and you definitely have, having been in some of those presentations, and I think people will see it here. You do have an absolute love for this brand. So I'm gonna put you on the spot and say, do you have a favorite expression of the Balvenie?
Ooh.
I know it's like, picking a favorite song on your favorite album, but
It's like your favorite child.
exactly.
I'll say upfront, I'm not dodging the question, but I'll say upfront, it super depends for me on like my mood. Where am I? Am I eating something with it? Am I having a cigar with it? Am I, like all of those things definitely affects what I'm craving. Like what time of year is it? What's the weather? Um, but I'll say, of course, my prevailing always, because it's the first Balvenie I ever tried. So the absolute special place in my heart one is Caribbean Cask 14-year-olds. And
Okay.
it's also such a fun one to share on the job because um it's so approachable and sweet and smooth that you can get some folks who might not be used to single malts or might be hesitant about trying a scotch to suddenly come on board. I mean, I can't even count the number of people who've said to me, this is the first scotch I really liked. I mean, it just is so inviting and lovely. But at the same time, the rum that we season the casks with is so intense and complex that there's also incredible depth and nuance to the whiskey that draws in folks who've been drinking whiskey since before I was born. So it's this really cool heavy hitter where every single corner of the market, from the total novice to the total expert decades in, finds something they love in the Balvenie, whether that's, oh, there's this sweet vanilla side that I can finally see as approachable, or I've never tried anything like this. There's so much depth to it. The Caribbean cast just reaches everyone. It's amazing.
I don't disagree. Yeah, it is one of my favorites as well. So when we also like to ask, how do you unwind? What is that? What is, when you're in an industry like this, obviously, a lot of long nights, a lot of drinking. What is that reset? How do you reset? How do you take time for yourself? What are some of the things that you do when you're not, pouring this beautiful juice?
I'll say when I'm on the road, I always try to make sure I stay in a nice, like calming hotel. A lot of times I seek out ones that feel more like apartments. I know that sounds odd,
Okay.
but ones that have like a kitchen or things like that. And my first stop when I get into market, and this actually surprises other brand ambassadors too, is I always go to the grocery store and I get like a case of seltzer and fruit and things that make me feel comfortable at home. And I put them in my hotel room. And I oftentimes try to, if I can get a room with a kitchen or something, make breakfast in the morning. So it's like a way to feel a bit more at home on the road. Um, and also, I'm big on taking breaks and trying to find little moments of alone time, even if it's 15 minutes between parts of an event or stopping at my hotel room to take a breather and have a cup of tea for 30 minutes. Like that can be life changing. So I've become now 5 years in, of course, more vocal about my needs on the road. Because when you first start as an ambassador, of course, can be overwhelming. You're kind of just going with it. And now I can say, like, I need an hour between all of our daytime events and our evening events. So, like, make sure I get back to my hotel room for a little bit, catch up on emails, take a breather, and just be in a silent room alone because I'm actually naturally not a very outgoing person. I really love alone time. I really love unwinding by myself. And so this job can, of course, be overwhelming for multiple days at a time. And finding those little moments of making sure I'm honoring that alone time is really important. And it's definitely a nice reset. Like I know I'll be better for the evening events if I just have even 30 minutes by myself beforehand. So
Yeah. Oh, that is very, that self-care is very important. So, we always like to end our interview with a fun question. So we always ask if you could have a Balvenie, let's say we'll go to Balvenie Caribbean cask with anyone dead or alive, who would it be and why?
oh my goodness. I would say honestly, Anthony Bourdain was a huge reason I got into the Balvenie in the first place. And he sadly passed away just a month before I started this job. And I was hoping to actually, you know, spend some time on the job with him. But he poured me my first Balvenie actually at an event I got to go to as a plus one once. And he had Caribbean cask on the back bar, and I introduced myself, and he said, "Bartenders are the best people in the world. Thank you for coming. It was amazing." And he poured a little dram of Caribbean cask, and that was the first time I ever tried the Balvenie. So I wish now that I knew more about the whiskey and the spirit and the distillery, that I could revisit that with him and really talk about it now that I know and love it as much as he did.
That is a perfect answer. I'm biased because I'm also a big fan of his, but even that moment that you share. So thank you for sharing that. But yeah, Naomi, thank you so much for being on. I know, I've had the pleasure again, like I said, of having a dram or two with you, and it's always been a privilege and a pleasure. So thank you so much for doing this and sharing a little bit more of yourself with us. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was lovely.